geopolitics is once again a key concern for business and investors. For that reason, we will now dive into this topic, starting with a film to present some of the main aspects we will be addressing. Take a look. Game theory has been very much at the forefront of discussions as shifting power relationships and conflicting interests reshaped the world order. And to discuss the changing rules of international engagement from a European perspective, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome the recent Prime Minister of Finland, Sanna Marin. Please give her a warm welcome. Sanna Marin, we are very excited to have you here with us this afternoon. Thank you very much. We opened this discussion as the G7 takes place in Italy, with a focus, of course, on the conflict still raging at the doorstep of Europe between Ukraine and Russia, a conflict whose outcome remains highly uncertain. So let me ask you to start with, how can or how should Europe support Ukraine further? And how should the EU deal with Russia in the long term?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I think it's so important that events like this also goes through geopolitics, because it's the platform that actually defines so much nowadays. I was just earlier this week in Berlin, where the Ukrainian Recovery Summit was held, met with the Ukrainian Vice Prime Minister Yulia there, and also other friends, Ukrainian friends as well. As you mentioned, now the G7 is convening. Later this week we will have the Peace Summit, Ukrainian Peace Summit in Switzerland, and of course later this month the big event, big summit of NATO will be held in Washington. So this will be a month for Ukraine in many senses. I think what is happening in Ukraine, it's not only a matter of Ukraine, it's actually a matter of the whole world. Ukraine is only a forefront of much larger and wider war values that is going on. And what will happen in Ukraine will define also, I believe, the future of democracies that believe in our values, our way of life. So it's so important how is the outcome of the Ukrainian war. I think that we must give Ukraine all what is needed to make sure that Ukraine will win the war. Because if Ukraine will lose the war, I think we will only see decades and decades of wars ahead. Russia wouldn't stop, and it won't stop in Ukraine if Russia will gain land, gain other victories in Ukraine. Next up will be Moldova. Then I think Russia will gaze on Western Balkans, then maybe even NATO countries, Baltic countries, for example, because Putin has also said that they are actually trying to build again this great empire that once was during the Soviet, under the Soviet rule. So I don't think that Putin would stop in Ukraine if they would gain some kind of victories in Ukraine. So we need to prevent, first of all, upcoming wars in Europe, decades and decades of these uncertainties and hardship in Europe, but also looking from bigger perspective, as I mentioned, it's not only about Ukraine, it's not only about Europe. Actually, the big game that it's now played, it's between democratic countries and authoritarian regimes and the whole rule-based order in the world. We build up together rules after the Second World War for a good reason. To prevent countries to attacking another countries, we set up these rules together to make sure that independent sovereign countries will have their own say in the table, that they can define their own futures. So what is happening now in Ukraine is actually a much wider battle of values, while the whole rule-based order is being questioned. And if democratic countries will send out a message that we are weak, we are not behind our values, we are not behind this rule-based order, and we will let Russia and Putin run over Ukraine, then the whole rule-based order system will collapse. So I strongly believe and think that this is a defining moment of history, where democracies have to show strength, have to show resilience, and have to show that we will stop Putin, whatever it takes. And Ukraine will need a lot of help. It needs arms, more heavy weapons, as they have said, and now it's very important, the discussion about the different types of missiles, for example, can it be used under also Russian soil? So I think this is a very important discussion, and also there have been decisions being made already. Then the second big discussion after the discussion of weapons and what they need, and this of course affects also people in here, is what to do with this big amount of Russian frozen assets that is mostly in Belgium but also elsewhere. And I understand that this is a very difficult discussion because we also have rules here, but I find that it would be very important also to send Putin the message that if you attack independent Syrian country, there will be cost and there will be price. And I think that it's very, very important that now also countries in the G7 meeting is discussing what to do with these Russian frozen assets. Can it be used as some kind of collateral? Can it be used directly? How can it be used to rebuild Ukraine to make sure that they will cope in the midst of war? And this is the second big discussion that is now going on. And of course, third is the ongoing support of Europe, United States, what will happen to this support after now the European elections, upcoming elections in different countries, and especially the upcoming elections in US, because everybody is looking at that election, gasping their breath, what will happen there. It's for the citizens of United States to decide, but of course it will affect worldwide, it will have impact worldwide, and that's why everybody's gasping their breath and looking at the States.
So let's dive further into the topic of European defense and NATO. Of course, last year NATO members reinforced their commitment to spending at least 2% of their GDP on defense. And March this year, of course, saw the first ever European defense industrial strategy. So do you see Europe becoming more of a leader in defense? And what do these changes mean more broadly for the EU's geopolitical positioning?
I don't think that we have any other choice but to raise our defense budget. I think the 2% should be a minimum. Finland, my own home country, is already in that level. And no surprise, we have that long border with Russia, over 1,200 kilometers with Russia. We have very, very difficult history with Russia. We have been in wars with them half a dozen times over the past 700 years. And we have lost lands, we have lost lives. We know what kind of neighbor we are dealing with. So we are using the 2% already, and I think Europe has no other choice but to raise our defense budgets because we cannot always rely on the help of US. I'm very grateful for US to be such a big part in this war in Ukraine. We're very grateful for all the help, military help, economic help, everything that US is providing. But at the same time, Europe has to look in the mirror and see the harsh reality that we are not capable of handling the situation ourselves. So I think Europe should be a better partner. We should be a better partner in NATO. We should be a better partner to US because Europe isn't the only place where there is conflicts, where there is wars. Now in the Middle East, perhaps in the future, unfortunately, also more and more in Asia. So we cannot always rely the eyes of US to be in Europe. So we need to make better partners ourselves, and we need to raise our defense budgets to the 2% minimum, I think. And then it's also very important that we will upscale all the production, military production industry that we have. And I think also that it's very important that now in the upcoming European Commission, there probably will be commissioner for defense, especially defense industry, to boost up, to scale up the production of military material in Europe, so we will be better prepared in the future, as we already should have been.
I probably do not need to remind this audience that you took the unprecedented step of joining NATO just 3 months into the war in Ukraine, despite a lack of consensus within your country and within your government. So how did you manage the situation, and what do you think we can learn from these crises?
What was the big shift in Finland that enabled us to have actually one of the fastest accession to NATO ever made, and also together with our neighbor Sweden? What happened? Well, the big one reason is the war in Ukraine. Without the war in Ukraine, without Putin's and Russia's aggression in Ukraine, I don't think that we have made that decision now. It was a clear signal and message to Putin and to Russia. If you act like this, there will be consequences, and one consequence is Finland and Sweden to join NATO. Because we saw that Russia is a neighbor that doesn't respect borders, and what is the only border that Russia would respect? It's the NATO border. So that is, of course, the single most important reason why Finland is now a NATO country. We also had, of course, discussions during that period of time, very hard period of time, when Russia invaded Ukraine with full force. And of course, there was discussions about would this kind of decisions mean further escalation. I always thought, and I still think, what is further escalation? We already have a full-fledged war in Europe. I think that is the ultimate escalation. And I think that it's also very important that we made the decision together, not only within our countries with this big consensus, but also together with Sweden. So day-to-day basis, I was in touch with Prime Minister then Magdalena Andersson. Our ministers communicated daily to make sure that there wasn't any room for Russian propaganda, any room for Russian different mean things that they might do, that we were contact constantly with our neighbors, and we planned every step of the way together. We announced everything together. We made every decision at the same time within our countries. So there weren't any room for different mean things from an authoritarian perspective. And I also find that when it comes to foreign and security policy, small countries like Finland, we don't have the luxury to disagree on the most important things like foreign and security policy. We have to stick together, and we have to make decisions in a consensus as broadly as possible, because we have this big aggressor just in our neighbor, and we cannot afford to have petty quarrels when it comes to most important things in our societies, like security, like defense, like foreign policy. And I hope that also other countries out there might learn something from the Finnish way of handling these very important, crucial decisions that we all have to make, whether it's in the public, in the political side, or in the private side. When it comes to these matters, these are very, very serious and unfortunately the reality of the world today.
So constant, open, regular communication with allies, of course, to maintain that consensus. Now, Ukraine applied for EU membership just 4 days after Russia invaded. Is this a good idea, first of all? And is this plan for EU expansion, further EU expansion, realistic and achievable, especially in light of the recent EU elections?
Well, I work with Ukraine in many fronts. I work also with Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, and one of my key tasks is to work with Ukraine and Moldova also concerning the EU accession. And I also work in non-profit organizations to trying to create a path for Ukraine for the EU membership, but also in NATO. I was also part of this international task force of working group that gave these suggestions to the upcoming NATO summit in Washington, how to make sure that Ukraine will become a member of NATO in the future. What are the steps there? I think also here we have to look at the much larger perspective, not only the different boxes that Ukraine has to tick to make sure that it can become a member of European Union. I think we have to see a bit much bigger game that is played actually not only in Eastern Europe but also in the Western Balkans when we are discussing about enlargement in Europe. If European Union and NATO don't give perspective, don't give view to the future to countries like Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Western Balkans, then there will be others. There will be other players in the world, like Russia, like China, and others that will give that perspective. So there's a much bigger game played in Europe right now than just can you tick all the boxes when it comes to the EU accession or NATO accession, and can you fulfill all the criteria? Of course, I think these countries also have to fulfill the criteria when it comes to, for example, the EU membership, because these rules are there for the benefit of the people. Rule of law, anti-corruption, equality, human rights, all of these rules are there for a reason, to make sure that European citizens have a good life. So of course, Ukraine also have to fulfill all these criteria. But we shouldn't give also here any room for Russian propaganda, for example, against the EU and have those petty quarrels within European Union when it comes to these different accession criteria. So we need to help Ukraine to fulfill the criteria, and we need to show them a clear pathway for a better life. To be part of European Union, to be part of NATO, to be part of our community with the common values, because they have set themselves that they want to become a member of European Union, they want to become a member in NATO. So we also have to help them to achieve all the accession criteria that they are now tackling at the same time as there is war going on, and they are doing tremendous job. They are doing a lot of things, for example, to cutting the corruption within the system. That is a real problem as well, and we also have to look this very realistically. But there's a bigger game that is played in Europe right now, in Ukraine, but also in Western Balkans, and we cannot push this fact aside and just look at criteria that you have to fulfill when it comes to accession in these organizations or these institutions.
A timely message at a time of much electoral confusion. Now, sadly, geopolitics is not the only existential challenge faced by the world right now. There's also climate change. And your home country, Finland, is at the forefront of change on that front. It has Europe's most ambitious climate target and is fourth in the world with the aim to become carbon neutral by 2035. So are you confident that your country will succeed? And how is the new geopolitical reality affecting transition targets?
Well, as you mentioned, unfortunately, geopolitics isn't the only threat that humankind is facing, and conflicts and wars that we are seeing across the world. But we also are facing this existential threat of climate change and loss of biodiversity. And if we don't tackle this threat, we don't get another chance. And this is the harsh reality here. If we don't make the decisions when it comes to reducing emissions, when it comes to make sure that we have those carbon sinks or prevent mass death of different species, then we don't get another chance. We don't have another negotiation round with Mother Nature, so we need to act now. Why Finland put up such a high, I would say, very high target of becoming climate neutral just within 10 years? There are two reasons. Of course, we understand that we are a small country and we cannot affect climate change ourselves. We know that Finland becoming climate neutral, it doesn't save the world. We need all the big players. We need China, we need US, we need all of Europe, we need every country on board to make these changes within our society. So we're not stupid in a way. We know that we cannot make a big change as a single country. But why we want to be so ambitious? It's economic reasons, of course. To be at the forefront, to be the front player in this change that it's inevitable anyway, gives our businesses and our companies the leverage in the future to promote, to export these great solutions that we are producing. Because we have ambitious targets, our industries and our companies can also have this platform where they will create the high-class world technological solutions to fight and tackle climate change. And how we set up these targets, it wasn't us politicians alone, it wasn't the public sector, we actually did it together with the industries themselves. So they are very committed, and they made their own roadmaps, how their industries, whether it's wood industry, the forest industry, or steel, or whatever, they made their own roadmaps, how to achieve that very ambitious target, and how to shift away from fossil fuels, for example, and use much more greener, sustainable energy sources, how to make, for example, green steel. So when it comes to climate change and the change that it's inevitable, our companies will be very competitive, they will be in the forefront, and they will have the solutions that they will sell you worldwide. And I hope that this will also give big export revenues to Finland. So we were also, I would say, looking this from an economic perspective. And also when it comes to European scale, I hope that Europe understands the possibilities that we have out there if we are the front players, if we can really make the green transition already in paper a reality. I think we could give the world-class technological revolution, but also we could make a lot of money out of this transition to play our card right.
So the transition in Finland is not just a top-down approach, it's about empowering every sector to be in charge, lead their own transition, to make it a systemic approach and process. A more personal question, maybe to wrap up this great exchange. You were the world's youngest Prime Minister at 34. You're now 38. You carry them well, I have to say. With so many bright years ahead of you, what's next? And will you be returning to politics at some stage?
Well, I have never actually made any 5-year or 10-year plan for myself. I'm a politician by heart. I joined my party when I was about 20 and, of course, ran in elections because I felt so passionate about issues like climate, human rights, equality, etc. So I was always so passionate about these matters. So I never made any 5-year or 10-year plan for myself, and I never guessed when I was younger, a teenager or a student in university, to thought that I would become a Prime Minister of Finland. It wasn't something that I aimed or targeted, but it happened because I was so passionate and worked for these issues along the way. And I don't have a plan for myself to the upcoming 10 years. I think if you want to do, and I want to do good in the world, then there are many pathways to do that. The most important thing is that you are committed and that you want to make a change and that you want to make a difference in the world. And I also talk in different events across the world and meet a lot of young people. And I want to send them the message, not only that you have the possibility to make a change, I also want to say that you have the responsibility to make a change, because there's nobody else out there that will make the change for you. And I think each one of us have to make ourselves to take that responsibility to try to fight climate change, try to tackle these big crises that we have faced. And during our governmental period, everything happened. First, the pandemic. I was being Prime Minister only for a couple of months. First, the pandemic hit. Then the war in Europe, followed by the energy crisis and the big blackmail of Putin using energy against Europe. Then inflation. So we have seen a lot of big crises happening during these few years. And I think this is a learning point for not only politicians, but also private business, that we have to be more prepared when it comes to these big challenges that we are facing. And we have to stop being naive. So my answer to your questions, what is ahead of me? That's not important. I think what is important is that we are really taking these big challenges that we are facing seriously, and that each one of us is trying to make a difference in the world, hopefully for the better.
And we wish you the best of luck for that. Thank you very much. Sanna Marin, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.